Good morning and welcome to the It's All Greek to Me blog tour. I'm Dr. Paul Kiritsis and this is blog number 14. Today we're going to be discussing one of the greatest legends of all time, that being the legend of Atlantis, and whether it was fact or fiction. And this is also the first of a two-part series. We'll begin at an island upon which the theory of Atlantis supposedly formed, and that island is Santorini in the Aegean Sea. Santorini was once a quiescent island composed chiefly of limestone and schists. It became the Aegean's protagonist of periodic cataclysms only after the present Hellenic volcanic arc came into existence some 3 million years ago, a time when eruptions began at a depth of 1,000 meters on the adjacent Aegean seafloor. Since then, the volcano has reconstituted and dismembered itself 11 times. The last of these paroxysms occurred in about 1520 BCE, a period in which at least 2 Minoan settlements were thriving on the island. It unraveled as 4 main phases of activity around a shallow flooded caldera, lasting about 4 days, and releasing the collective energy of 30 hydrogen bombs. The volcano came to life with sulphurous emissions of steam, gas, and smoke from the volcanic cones beyond the South Bay. Subsequently, a fluid ejection of popcorn-like pumice and basalt fragments from the central vent blanketed the island with a powder white blanket resembling snow. After a momentary pause to clear its throat, it proceeded to spew an undulating cloud of superheated ash several kilometers into the sky. The ensuing darkness hovered above the stratovolcano like a malignant tumor, and soon larger pieces of fine white pumice pelted back down on the beleaguered island, shrouding it in layer upon layer of volcanic debris. Little by little, the caldera grew until seawater entered from the South Bay, creating phreatic explosions, groundwater mixing with ascending magma that sent lava hurtling in all directions. The incessant convulsion racked the wide, funnel-shaped vent with such force that remnants of shield volcanoes that had accumulated within the pre-Minoan caldera crumbled completely, their remains shooting out in horizontal blasts that fleetingly dammed back the sea. All in all, the volcano spewed its guts out with such urgent turbulence that 30 cubic meters of magma were expelled into the atmosphere. The rapidly emptying magma chamber below Thera formed a gaping chasm, hundreds of meters deep, which could no longer support the weight of the island's heart center. In one ear-splitting roar, the walls of the disintegrating crater collapsed vertically into the abyss. Torrents of water rushed in to fill the gaping fissure, generating further phreatic explosions and shallow-seated earthquakes that exceeded 10 on the Richter scale. These subterranean earthquakes would have vibrated the seabed around Thera as the caldera collapsed in on itself, spawning 360-degree tsunamis that would have assaulted every island in the Aegean Sea. For years afterwards, the sunsets would have been a deep blood red. The Therians of the day would have interpreted the rumbling and the emissions of gas, steam, and smoke from the volcanic cones as the divine displeasure of the Great Mother Goddess and her entourage of lesser deities. Just as with their Minoan cousins, they would have made sacrifices to placate their god's wrath, although as the premonitory tremors increased in frequency and severity, their trepidation would have no doubt gotten the better of them. Those not overcome by primitive terror risked staying and forfeiting their lives in due course. Everyone else gathered one's personal belongings and took to the seas in search of a new home. What became of them remains a mystery to this very day. Might archaeologists find in the near future shed light upon their destiny? Perhaps they colonized some remote corner of the Aegean and continued their enormously complex matriarchal civilization elsewhere. Sadly, there is no evidence to support such a comforting and satisfying conjecture. More likely, the Therians disembarked on an Aegean island in close proximity to the major geological convulsion. From there, they would have watched the natural disaster unfold in complete awe and reverence. They'd have splayed themselves out along the shores in silence, churning through the possibilities of what might have angered their gods, until the tsunamis arrived to assail them. Ironically, it was their deserted homes that survived to tell their tale, quiescent under layers of pea-sized pellets of pumice that preserved them until the forces of erosion brought this forgotten Bronze Age world back from the deaded depths of Tartarus. It wasn't until the early 20th century that Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos honed in on the Aegean folk memory of the disaster. Marinatos had formulated a clandestine theory that Minoan Crete and Plato's Atlantis were one and the same, though what actually convinced him to begin excavations was a pivotal supposition put forth by seismologist Angelos Galanopoulos, who redefined Plato's story as the commemorative fate of two islands, Crete and Thera. In this plausible reconstruction, he proposed that the first and larger of the two islands, being Crete, may have been the royal state, whilst the smaller one, Thera, was probably the metropolis or capital city and religious centre. Late in the same century, archaeological excavations revealed the opposite to be true. Knossos on Crete had been the capital of the Minoan Empire, and Thera merely one of its many outposts. Nevertheless, Galanopoulos' confounded hypothesis held no sway over the desired result. Convinced that the Therian volcano had contributed greatly, if not wholly, to the demise of Minoan power on Crete, Marinatos began digging in 1967 with excavations focused near Akrotiri in southern Thera. At first he stumbled across stone tools, pottery, mortars and pestles, but as he penetrated deeper into the layers of pumice, the remnants of man-made walls, cobbled streets and cooking utensils came to light. The discovery would go on to shake the very foundation stone of archaeology itself, revealing a Bronze Age town with a structured assembly of roads and houses, underpinned by a subterranean network of elaborate land drainage ditches, conduits and navigational channels. These were linked to cesspits and took the wastewater and sewerage from the indoor baths and lavatories of homes by way of clay pipes cemented within their walls. The archaeologists working under Marinatos revealed that the indoor lavatories worked in a comparable manner to the ones in use today. The waste falling through clay pipes to a chamber below would be flushed into a cesspit by water from the town drain, with the pipes interconnected in such a way that a siphon effect was formed, drawing repulsive odours down the pipes and into the lavatory. In the end, what Marinatos thought would be a systematic excavation of a few primitive cobblestone structures turned out to be the rediscovery of a Bronze Age civilization whose people had attained a level of sophistication and advancement equaling that of Minoan Crete. In actual fact, the architectural features unearthed at the archaeological site of Akrotiri mimic those that are seen amidst the Minoan ruins of Knossos. You've got masons' marks, light wells, pier and door partitions, pillared crypts, ashlar facades, wooden columns on stone bases, a dita, and the erection of multi-story buildings. Strangely, the destruction of Thera and the subsequent collapse of Minoan civilization were marked by the disappearance of these technologies from the face of the earth. From this time forth, evidence of their existence could only be found in Kyklavic traditions, which passed orally from generation to generation. Successive retellings of oral folklore have the detrimental effect of confounding the story's elements to such a degree that the kernel and essence are eventually lost. This would have certainly been the fate of the Minoan super-civilization and Thalassokratia, which means seaborne empire, had it not been for Plato, the preeminent philosopher of the classical world, who was so impressed by the rise of the gargantuan feats and the tragic downfall of this phenomenal culture that he immortalized it in his legend of Atlantis. In Plato's account, Atlantis itself was a rich and bountiful island continent in the Atlantic Ocean, with the stunning capital of the same name situated at the extreme southern tip of the island. It appears that the landmass was oblong in shape, with broad, flat and low-lying plains in the interior that were well watertied by towering mountains that dotted its coastline against the destructive forces of wind and sea. The land, contoured much higher and precipitous to the north, levelled out towards the south in a way that evoked the contrasting landscapes of Greece proper, with a surface area of about 203,500 square kilometres. Most of the southern face, in which the vast fertile plain lay, was crisscrossed by subsidiary ditches whose perfect grid pattern epitomised Plato's love of geometrical form. The canals interlinked and formed major highways through which sea vessels transported metals, precious stones, timber, and a copper-gold alloy, which was called orichalcum, across the island. Lying at the southern end of the continent, the city of Atlantis was a bustling metropolis whose design could only have been inspired by a lover of engineering, architecture, and mathematics, one who perceived numbers and fractions as the divine signature of a universal progenitor. It was comprised of 3 concentric ringlets of land, each separated by a transport and irrigation channel. Legends tell that the canals had been hewn out by the sea god to guard his mortal wife Plato. Centuries afterward, the city's inhabitants conjoined these rings of land with bridges. The outermost of these, half a kilometre wide, joined the inner metropolitan centre to the greater city beyond. For residents of the metropolitan region, admission to the sea was via a wide canal which branched off from the nether point of the third concentric island and sluiced through the greater metropolis. Both the inner and outer metropolis, fortified by a thick stone wall, covered a total area of about 400 square kilometers. And I have a picture of, here we go, I have a picture of the city here. That's what it would have looked like. Now, if one were a tourist visiting Atlantis, he'd ply the Great Canal that linked the sea with the mighty metropolis in a ship and dock at a great harbour. Disembarking, he'd walk overland across the first of the bridges and enter the outermost and largest of the concentric islets. At once it would occur to him that the Atlanteans were master masons, having constructed parklands, lavish gardens and civil buildings like stadia and gymnasia that wrapped around the entire length of land and blended into one another in an aesthetically pleasing manner. More than likely he'd be impressed by the tricolour theme exhibited by the buildings of the capital, a phenomenon wrought by blocks of stone quarried from local mines that were black, white or red. The tourist would then traverse a second bridge to a smaller ring of land on which residential houses and equitation centres were built. Here it might occur to him that the enormous stone walls surrounding each concentric ring of land are sheathed in a different metal, the outermost brass, the middle tin, and the innermost orichalcum. The more observant might also realise that the walls themselves are decked by towers and gates at points where bridges and tunnels pass through them. By crossing the final bridge, the tourist would enter the dreamy realm of Atlantis' magical metropolitan heart centre. The structure of Atlantis mimicked that of ancient Athens, built around a well-fortified acropolis which enclosed a cluster of palaces, gardens, temples, and baths. According to legend, Poseidon, besotted by the island's natural beauty, snatched it as his own fiefdom. He proceeded to carve out 3 concentric rings of land at the south end of his island, jabbing his trident onto the ground of the innermost one so that 2 natural springs spurted forth. The 2 jets themselves, one of hot and one of cold running water, supplied nourishment to the 5 pairs of male twins he sired with his mortal wife Plato. In later times, the Atlanteans commemorated the divine feat by erecting a megalithic temple to the sovereign of the sea. Standing at the highest point of the fortified hill, the tourist would lift his gaze up to a forest of silver-coated pillars. These bear the laborious weight of a temple ceiling comprised chiefly of ivory, silver, and orichalcum, and embellished by mythical figures made of ivory inlaid with gold. Astonishingly, the entire structure is shrouded by silver, save for the gilded pinnacles. Inside, the centerpiece of the temple reveals itself as a golden statue of Poseidon, at the helm of a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses. Holding his trident in one hand and the chariot's reins in the other, he stands ready to command the winds, gales, and breezes, which morph the ethereal face of the sea. The statues of 100 sea nymphs riding on dolphins encircle him in a manner reinforcing his incontestable power over the water element. For a tourist, the spectacle of lesser sea deities saluting Poseidon might serve as a blatant reminder to always seek his blessings before attempting to traverse the pelagic waters. Now, to end today's blog, I'm going to read to you a poem called Drowned World, and it relates to the disaster of Hurricane Katrina in the US. So, like in 2005, the United States suffered its costliest natural disaster with Hurricane Katrina. When it ripped through the southeastern corner of the country, it instigated damages to personal properties that amounted to $81 billion and claimed over 1,800 lives. Much of this devastation came after the levee system in New Orleans, Louisiana failed, sparking episodes of flash flooding that saw much of the metropolis submerged in water for weeks on end. Okay, so this poem appears in Sensations Magazine 21st Century America, issue 48, and explores a fleeting memory of the disaster. It's cold, humid, wet, and calculatingly evil inside this room, as if Katrina had struck only moments ago. Words rolling onto the page like frothy tsunamis full of anger originate from ruptures in the earth below. Tectonically challenged and volcanoed out, the outpouring of grief streams like hot lava through heart and veins, reprived by the frothing of memories on its watery surface. Then nails fine flesh, but won't loosen the afterlife's reins. And with that, I will see you next time for the next part of the Atlantis blog. See you then.